Hi, and welcome back to the show. Today we are speaking with Sam Meklir of Samuel A. Meklir and Associates. Mr. Meklir has represented seriously injured victims for over 35 years. At one time, he had the highest injury verdicts in Macomb and Sinclair counties. Mr. Meklir has won multiple large verdicts and settlements in all areas of personal injury, including medical malpractice, wrongful death, construction accidents, fire, birth trauma, motorcycle, automobile, and product liability cases. Well, Mr. Meklir, thank you very much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure.
Well, first of all, I'd like to maybe get into this whole idea of medical malpractice. It's obviously a widely talked about subject, but there's still some mystery behind, how to approach this whole idea of, what happens if a doctor is negligent or does something inappropriate, during a procedure. How can you expand on that?
First of all, I think the public has to understand there have been studies that show that there are more than 100,000 people every year killed by the negligence of doctors or people in hospitals. So that's more than everybody killed in the war in Vietnam, for example. But that's every year. If somebody goes into the hospital or goes to a doctor's office, those people have an obligation to practice up to what we call the standard of practice. If they violate that, if they should run a red light, medically speaking, so to speak, then you have a case. If you have somebody go into the hospital, for example, for an outpatient procedure, and they spend 2 weeks in the hospital, generally speaking, something went wrong. And if it's investigated, we can generally find out what went wrong and whether or not the happening of this was caused by malpractice. The other thing to be concerned about in a medical malpractice case, especially in Michigan, is that we have a short statute of limitations. And statute of limitations means that you only have so long within which to start or commence your action. If you wait beyond that period of time, no matter how serious you've been injured, no matter how many people have been affected, you get no money because you've waited too long. That is a real problem in not just malpractice cases, but across the board when people have something serious or catastrophic happening in their family to themselves, because it takes them a while to get back on their feet and start thinking straight. So they tend to wait, and that waiting can be fatal to a good case.
Well, obviously there's a lot to think about, and so I imagine they should be reaching out to you or a lawyer in general as soon as things happen.
Absolutely. People, like I say, when something serious happens, it's discombobulating for people. The breadwinner is in the hospital. The mother's no longer cooking dinner, things of that nature. One of the children needs special care. And what happens is the family is thrown into disarray. It's very important, while the evidence is fresh, to get to a good lawyer who knows how to investigate all these cases, and who knows how to collect the medical records, who knows how to send out investigators, while the evidence is fresh, before it gets tampered with. One of the things that we worry about in any medical malpractice case is trying to get the records quickly before the people at risk management recognize that this is a problem. And then you have the possibility that those records become altered. I'm not saying they always become altered, but in our business, it pays to be careful.
It sounds very reasonable. Let's move on to closed head injuries. I imagine that's blunt force trauma, non-bleeding scenarios. What can you say about that whole topic as far as the legal side?
Well, closed head injuries are what we're seeing now in the NFL, where these old football players, not even old football players, are having all kinds of disability and problems because of repeated head trauma. Well, the same thing can happen with one good trauma. For example, if you're in an auto accident and your auto gets hit at a high rate of speed, well, you're strapped in, but your head goes back and forth and the brain bounces back and forth against the skull. That can cause very serious brain trauma. A lot of that can be seen on MRIs or CT scans or other scans, and some of it is more subtle. And what we wind up seeing from people with closed head injuries are changes of personality, forgetfulness, short-term memory loss, the inability to remember words. All these things can be caused by an auto accident. It can be caused by a fall. It can be caused by many different things. And it's very important when somebody does have an injury that involves head trauma to get them analyzed by a neuropsychologist and other specialists in that field.
Now, what about the legal costs associated with actually, not legal, but the actual medical costs associated with going and getting that checked out? Isn't that a barrier for people to actually get checked out early on in the kind of the diagnosis phase?
Well, first of all, it depends on the insurance. If there's an automobile involved, then we have no fault here in Michigan, and the carrier has an obligation under the personal injury protection benefits to pay for the medical that's involved in the accident and pay for those injuries. It's important, therefore, that you get to a lawyer that knows exactly what he's doing in these cases, because by getting the patient to go to the doctors when he or she has a problem, you have a continuum of care, and those doctors then are in a position to better diagnose the changes in the patient's personality, in the patient's cognition, and so on, and get them to the correct specialist. So money is not the object. What is the object, though, is time, the consistency of treatment, and understanding what makes a case worthwhile, and more importantly, what it takes to get the patient well. Because if you let these things go for too long, then it's very difficult to help the patient in the future.
Very good advice. Sam, I'd like to actually elaborate a bit on the automobile accidents. I've been in a motorcycle or in an automobile accident myself, and I remember that sort of the feeling 24 hours afterwards, where you felt almost like a bit hungover. What's your thought about the first step that someone should take once they've had an impact with another vehicle?
Well, the first thing that happens normally is that the police arrive at the scene. We're talking now of any kind of serious impact. And it's hard to tell somebody how to react once they've been hit in the head or they've been seriously injured. But at least as to their family members, those people who have their wits about them, the police come over to the car and they say, "How are you feeling?" The answer should be, "I am shook up. I don't have any idea how I feel right now. Everything seems to be stunned and hurt," which is the case. And as you've described, it's like an athletic injury. The day of the injury is one thing. The next day is when everything hurts. So it's very important from the start of an automobile accident case that you let the police know. And if you go to the emergency room, you let the folks at the emergency room know those areas of the body that are hurting you, and let them know if it's true. I mean, we don't want to make up anything, that you've been shook up, you've had a head injury, you're not remembering things well. These are all things that you want to have on the record from the start. And again, you don't want to make up anything, but those things that are bothering you, you have to tell the people. If you've been, when they say, "What have you hit in the car?" Well, how do you know what you've hit? Somebody hit you going 50 miles an hour, the thing happened in a blink of an eye. So check yourself out, see if you've got black and blue marks anywhere that you don't feel yet. Those are the types of things that you do to start with. After that, in Michigan at least, you don't collect against the driver of the other vehicle who was negligent, or even the driver of your vehicle if they were negligent, unless you have what's called a serious impairment to a bodily function. Now you have to ask yourself, what is a serious impairment of a bodily function? And in Michigan, that has been litigated over and over again. And that's why it's very important to get to an attorney, and more importantly, to get to have your medical care looked after as soon as possible. But basically, what we need to do when there's an automobile accident and somebody is seriously injured, we have to see to it that they have medical care on a continuing basis if they need it, that they are careful to tell their physicians those things that are bothering them, because if not, it's very difficult to bring in, for example, a knee or a back that nobody complained about for several months and then tie it into the auto accident. So it's very important. But what is a serious impairment is in the eyes of the beholder. And that's the thing. For example, somebody who's a senior citizen who may have worked 40 years to retire, their life revolves around golf, recreation, spending time with their wife, taking walks. Well, if they can't do those things, that's serious. And it's a very serious matter because that's what they spend their whole life working for. So a serious impairment to a bodily function can be anything. And it can be as much as being in a coma. It could be being unable to reproduce, depending on the type of injury. You may not be able to walk. You may not be able to lift or bend. But all of that relies on good medical background, good medical backup, and somebody who knows how to craft the case and the facts so that when they take the case to a jury, the jury understands that the person who is bringing the complaint was in fact seriously injured.
Now, very good advice regarding this whole injury issue when it comes to regular motor accidents. What about if you're a motorcyclist, and how does the motor vehicle accident scenario work with regards to the actual rider? And do they have the same rights or different rights, or not necessarily rights, but legal scenario than a driver does of a regular automobile?
Well, a motorcycle is a motor vehicle, and it's controlled by the same laws with respect to serious impairment of a bodily function. So in regards to getting treatment and things of that nature, it's very important to follow exactly what I just mentioned. I happen to be riding, I've ridden motorcycles since I'm 16 years old, and I continue to ride. And recently, I was on a ride and somebody missed a turn, and they wound up hitting a tree. Well, that person was seriously injured. Down the road, he's going to have some serious impairments. Well, a lot of motorcycle accidents happen because people are on telephones, they're distracted, they don't see us. For whatever reason, motorcycles don't register in the brains of certain motorists. And as a result, they get involved in accidents. The problems with motorcycles, the big problem with a motorcycle is there's no body surrounding you. In other words, there's no car body, there's no airbags, there's no seat belts. So the injuries tend to be more serious. But in terms of the law, if you're injured on a motorcycle, you're entitled to collect against the person that caused your injury, assuming you didn't cause it yourself. If you happen to be a passenger on a motorcycle and the driver of your motorcycle is negligent and goes off the road, for example, or crosses the center line, as a passenger, you can sue. You're the driver of your own motorcycle. But in terms of the actual law itself, there is very little difference. One of the key things, and I didn't mention it with respect to auto accidents, is to make sure before you get on the motorcycle or before you get in your car, you have the right insurance. Because the big insurance companies want to sell you as little insurance as you need, and yet that won't protect you in case of a catastrophe. And there are different types of insurance that protect you. And by that I mean there's liability insurance, so that if you should hurt somebody, they're covered and they're paid for their injury. By the same token, you can't control how much insurance the other person has. So if somebody injures you, they may only have a $20,000 policy. Well, you can buy underinsured motorcycle as well as underinsured auto insurance, and that'll cover the gap. So for example, you could put $1 million worth of insurance on your car or your motorcycle with respect to underinsurance or uninsured motorist protection. And that would protect you should somebody without insurance or with a small policy hit you.
Well, thank you very much for kind of clarifying some very important points. Obviously, a lot of it is preparation, and a lot of it is reacting properly when something does happen. Thank you very much for joining us today, Sam.
It's my pleasure. Nice talking to you.
We've been speaking with Sam Meklir. He has just wanted to mention he has recovered well over $250 million for his injured clients. Sam Meklir offers the experience, skill, and toughness you need to defend your rights. He is committed to meeting the needs of each individual client. You can check out Sam Meklir's website at michiganaccidentandinjurylawyer.com or call him at 1-888-406-1011. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.